do the long thing, talk the whole time because we have an esteemed group of panelists who are here with us today. But has everyone had a chance to review the agenda and our previous meeting minutes from October 7th?
Yes.
Fantastic. I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Fantastic. And online, we have Emily, Heather, and I see Sarah now as well. Thank you all for joining us. If you have anything come up or you want to stop and ask questions, please feel free to just raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for that. But I think I'd like to spend the lion's share of the time kind of jumping right into the new business portion after we do the updates. Starting with old business. For those of you who have not been a part of the committee or meetings recently, we have had a few site visits. So Angela and Rachel, which of you would like to kind of give us a status update of how that's going so far? Or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, 2 more to do. They're both scheduled this week, so by the end of the week they'll all be finished. And we have been gathering information from committee members who have been participating. And for those of you who have not yet had a chance to put your feedback on that form, if you'll do so, we'll compile it all to share with all of the members at the next meeting, which will be the 18th.
Thank you. I highly recommend for anyone who has not been on a site visit, extremely informative. I think we stay in the space of the theoretical being in this room, which we have to, but it's really fascinating to see up close the challenges that folks are dealing with. And even just for me, it was seeing the spacing needs of like, oh wow, that's a lot of kids crammed into a specific space and all the great work that's happening there. But I think it adds a new context and of course an element that's really important, and we're deciding what direction we're headed, how we become the best net value add to our partners, and make sure that we're fully understanding the needs when folks do come and share with us what their early childhood education needs are for their centers. We've got quorum, so let's jump right in. I'm happy to set the stage for this. Rachel, if you want to follow up after, I'm happy to do it. So we are joined today by several amazing human beings who are willing to donate their time. Spoiler alert, we're not paying you, so thank you for volunteering. And kind of the impetus for this is for us to circle back. Oh, you're going to be really disappointed if you're writing on check. Just to hear from folks at every level, policy, state, local, regional, at every level to understand what we're dealing with, where we've been, where we're going to. If you haven't been paying attention for the past 10 years, we had a couple of big things between COVID, Helene come in and kind of devastate so many spaces, but the early childhood space in particular has been uniquely impacted. And I think understanding where we are today in specifics, having some numbers, having some clear view, and very comprehensive, as opposed to a general kind of way, will set the stage for some really important conversations that we've been having and will continue to have with our local programs. I don't feel the need to particularly introduce everyone, but I will go ahead and name. We have folks all the way here from the state level, NC Commerce, Samantha Cole, who many of y'all may remember was with the chamber. So you can hold that against her. They're great. No, they've always been wonderful, thoughtful partners, and I'm grateful for it. I've not gotten a chance to interact with you a ton in person, Candace, but I read a lot of emails that have your name on them, and you seem extremely intelligent, and Rachel says you are, so you absolutely are. Erica, we've met once or twice before, and I probably was not important enough for you to remember who I am, so thank you for being here with us and accepting.
100% remember you every time.
Okay, I'm going for you for everyone for it. And Amy has been with us before on partnership with Children, grateful for many years here. Greg Borum has, if you attended any Leadership Asheville event and it's involved early childhood education, you've heard from Greg, wonderful expert, really good regional view. And I'm not going to show too much bias, but Philip Harden works for some awesome people and works with us on Health and Human Services side here and has been uploading things at a very local level. And I'm grateful for all of these folks being willing to share their expertise and wisdom with us. So with no further ado, and having stalled long enough for my colleague to join us, we can get rolling on the panel.
Well, thank you. I had the honor of reaching out to these folks and making invitations and was pleased to hear yes. Samantha to my left and I were actually in communication in September of 2024 about coming in to visit with the committee, and then a little sideways with our year. But we've got this group together during a time when the Buncombe County's early childhood period is really thinking about what is the highest and best use, to borrow a term that has been thrown around here, how can we best focus our investments in the space of early care education going forward? And as a part of that listening tour, if you will, we wanted to have a roundtable of experts. So first, even though Martin did a great job introducing you, I thought we would go down the line with a little bit about who you are and what you or your organization does. And we'll have a couple of questions that we do that, and then a little bit of time for kind of more open discussion and dialogue. We'll start off with introductions from Samantha.
Hi, everybody. I'm Samantha Cole. I serve as Child Care Business Liaison at the North Carolina Department of Commerce, which is a relatively uncommon role in terms of state economic development agencies. North Carolina is one of maybe a handful of states in the U.S. that has a role like this one that centers child care access in its workforce and economic development strategy. I get to work very closely with Candace and with Erica and all of our other wonderful partners on the panel today, which is great. While I am part of the state agency, I'm also a Buncombe County resident, and like Martin said, I have past professional history working at the Economic Development Coalition for Ashley-Buncombe County here for several years, and I still great to be with you.
Hey everybody, I'm Candace Witherspoon. I'm the director with the North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education, and that's a lot of letters because we're also under DHHS. We are the state agency for health and human services, but most importantly for children that are in licensed care from 0 to 5, but it also includes children who are in before and after school care up until the age of 12. That includes making sure that our programs and facilities, that includes homes, are safe for children, that the workforce is supported, and that we do a lot of things behind the scenes, like background checks and NC pre-K and all those things to kind of just make everything in early ed continue to work and function for the state of North Carolina.
And I'm Erica. I serve as the executive director of NC Child. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that's mission is to advocate for policies that improve the lives of all North Carolina children. We are very committed to early childhood education because we know that it has one of the greatest outcomes on how our children live and their ability to thrive. As a part of that role, we have some great research staff that do a lot of work in partnership with the Department of Commerce and with the U.S. Chamber Foundation and with other partners like WNC, our Early Childhood Coalition. We also have the incredible honor of serving as the fiscal host for a new business initiative that's launching called Excel NC that you'll be hearing about more and more in the coming months. Samantha and I have the honor of sitting on the advisory council for that team that will be led by business executives around the state. And I also have the opportunity to sit on the Governor's Early Childhood Task Force along with Candace. I was going to say something else and I don't know what it was. So I got lost in that, but it's great to see you all this morning.
Hi, I have a little bit of a froggy throat, so I hope you can hear me. Amy Berry, the director of Buncombe Partnership for Children. So our work is in the early childhood sphere with children birth to 5, the teachers who therefore teach them and their families. And the major focus of our work is on improving the quality of care and helping folks access affordable high quality care. In addition to many other programs from the university. So happy to be here amongst friends and colleagues.
Thanks. Also happy to be here amongst friends and colleagues. Greg Borum with the Western North Carolina Early Childhood Coalition. Worked with many of you over the years, learned from many of you over the years. Our organization is focused on making sure that childcare is affordable and accessible, high quality for all families in the Western region. We cover several of the Western North Carolina counties that have a regional focus, but we grew out of a coalition that actually started in Buncombe County back in the county building over there in the park a few blocks away. So we appreciate Buncombe County's long-term support and engagement.
Good afternoon. I'm Phil Harden. I'm the Economic Services Director for Buncombe County Health and Human Services. staff administer the SNAP program, Medicaid, most of the assistance programs. But one other program that we administer is subsidized childcare. And we do that through a contract with Southwestern Child Development.
Fantastic. Well, as you can hear, these folks are amazing, heavily involved in the work that we're doing, and will provide us a ton of guidance that they're doing for us, but we will be asking how. But let's start on a positive note, and probably, hopefully, one of the easier questions. Samantha, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind. As someone who has been in this work for quite some time locally, still lives here, involved in way more spheres than you mentioned during your resume, so I will give you kudos for that. What are some recent accomplishments related to early care and education that you're proud of? It could be specifically, it can be us as a state, whatever you feel like leading off with.
Sure. So I first of all thank you for making it about progress, because this is a very difficult, really complicated and large problem that we're talking about and that you all spend a lot of time talking about. And I think that in many cases, the size of that challenge creates a risk of decision paralysis, the sensation that there's not much we can do to chip away at something that big or that complicated. And I think alternatively, we're all better off if we look at the possible and we look at what we've been able to do. I've only been in the role that I'm in right now for a little over a year and a half. But I can tell you that, like Martin said, I used to work in a very hands-on workforce and economic development role, and I worked very closely with a lot of clients who were experiencing incredibly significant barriers to employment, things like returning to the community from incarceration, or people who were in long-term substance use disorder recovery, or people who had just been separated from work for a really long time, and that can snowball and keep people away from the workforce in the future. And in many cases, other barriers to workforce participation, like transportation, like housing, and like childcare, were coming up time and again, but we weren't necessarily seeing those challenges being integrated into the way we were practicing workforce and economic development. And largely, that seems different to me today than it did several years ago. It seems like more and more there is a consensus around the fact that childcare access is something that enables labor force participation, that enables economic opportunity to reach people in communities across the state. And it seems like there's just generally a broader coalition of voices participating in conversations like these about why it's important to make sure that that resource is more available, which I think is broadly a good thing. And another thing I want to add is that, unfortunately, as everyone in this room understands very well, we are a state that is unfortunately geographically quite likely to experience natural disasters and huge interruptions to everybody's ability to live, work, and raise families the way that we're comfortable doing. Natural disasters are unfortunately pretty frequent in North Carolina. I am pleased to hear that childcare is one of those things that's being thought of as infrastructure now. Whenever we think about rebuilding communities, when we think about resiliency, childcare access is something that is more closely related to lights, power, water, sewer, roads, bridges than I think it used to be in previous years. And that's for the best, because I can tell you personally, without access to childcare, it's just like not having access to broadband internet or not having access to power. My family can't function here the way that it needs to, and my husband and I can't participate in the workforce the way that we need to. And that was certainly the case of a lot of people who were disaster impacted here. So I think it's a really important stroke of progress that we're seeing childcare centered in disaster recovery too.
Same question?
Please.
So I have been with the division for about 2 years almost, coming up on my 2-year anniversary. And if you are aware of all the things that are happening in early ed, the division has been working very hard on redoing our goals, our quality rating improvement system, which had not been updated significantly for the past 30 years. And so as of this summer, those rules are finally official, and we have crossed the bridge that we finally have in place, which was a huge milestone, but also a celebration because it acknowledges change and differences. It acknowledges options for people. So it allows people to demonstrate quality through multiple pathways. Instead of previously we had a one-size-fits-all. And the same for education for teachers and staff members looking to get into the field. Also, again, acknowledges multiple pathways to enter that field. You don't only have to go the education route. We have a system that helps us to value experience just as much as education. And so the more pathways we have, the easier it is for people to join, to come into the field, to open a program, or to accelerate to a lead teacher or administrator. So just trying to open up those pathways to increase that.
So, Erica?
I think we've seen over the last 5 years a
Erica,
lot.
can you speak up a little bit, please? Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot more individuals and entities step up and take a role in trying to improve the system. And I think I don't want to repeat anything Samantha said about the broader understanding around it as infrastructure. But I took this role with NC Child a little over 3 years ago. And on my second day, I had a colleague who was an advocacy consultant for about 10 local chambers of commerce who called. And the first thing he said to me was, does your organization work on childcare? Because my chambers are worried about childcare. And what we've seen over the last 5 years, despite, I think, a lack of progress in terms of adequate investments and needed programs, what we have seen is a lot more members of the community really step into the space and say, how can we address this? I don't want to speak for Amy. I think the program that Biltmore's funded here is incredible, and have gotten the opportunity to hear her speak about that. But we've also seen the U.S. Chamber Foundation, the North Carolina Chamber really come out and advocate hard on this, along with a lot of those local chambers. And I think that broadly, we've seen a lot more public understanding around this issue as more and more families have tragically been impacted between the pandemic and disasters that we've seen. But all in all, I think we're moving toward a space where folks understand the need, and that's going to help us get what we need in terms of adequate investment.
So at Buncombe Partnership, we've been able to work alongside a number of community partners, and I have kind of a list of things that have happened over the last year that I think have really made an impact in the early care and education community. So obviously hurricane recovery work, won't go into all the details there, but being able to get money into the hands of providers to address loss of revenue, as well as, excuse me, address the damages that they've sustained. And also, unlike most of our other local partnership colleagues across the state, we have raised funds and then awarded grants to be able to directly support childcare staff, so individuals. And that's all been a heavy lift. And by the end of the month, it will be just under $5 million that we've gotten out. So, you know, there's still a great need, but being able to do that pretty quickly with substantial funds has resulted in kind of a solid short-term stability as we work towards the next. And while there have been a lot of closures of programs across the state, I know Candace is painfully aware of those statistics. We only had one closure in Buncombe, and that program was had already been in discussion about closing. Just a couple of other things. Erica mentioned the work with Biltmore in order to be able to expand infant and toddler care. And we received another grant from a Rotary Club that is allowing us to continue that work. So really happy that we've been able to expand 60 slots and looking forward towards more. And I'll talk a little bit later about the Teacher Fellows Program, but addressing the issue of having such an influx of teachers, new teachers with little or no classroom experience, and the ripple effect that has, being able to pilot a program for teachers with no up to 2 years experience to try and retain teachers and also improve classroom quality is really good.
everything said so far. And the accomplishments I'd like to highlight are, one, this room. So the fact that Buncombe County has a dedicated fund and a committee that's focused on childcare is a big accomplishment. I know that back several years ago, Amy and Marcia and I were around a table called Family Friendly Affordable Buncombe, and that they named FAB. That was really looking at how to advocate for 3 pillars for success for families: for transportation, housing, and childcare. And it was at the moment that Mission Hospitals was being sold, we knew that the city and county would have new tax revenue coming in as that facility moved from nonprofit tax exempt to for-profit. And, you know, we just applaud the county leadership that helped bring that to life at the county level. And I just want to celebrate that as a huge accomplishment for our county. The other thing I'd like to lift up is while they're gone, the compensation grants for teachers that were begun in the pandemic, we were able to win a limited short-term extension of this that ended at the end of March. That is a huge crisis, but thanks to the advocacy of those around this table, the work of you in the room, the work with Senator Corbin from the far west, we were able to pass that and have the state put in dollars to extend it. It didn't go long enough or far enough, in my opinion, but that is an accomplishment. I think that was a real watershed moment to break through a budget pass again. Last seems to be North Carolina's headline budget impasse, but to have that funding really still come through despite the items, and I think it's a big accomplishment.
Probably a little bit different in a way. We deal with the eligibility piece of childcare. And we do that through Southwestern Child Development. We'll say over the last 10 years, we get monitored on our processes every year. And I think that we have been above the state average for 10 years in a row. We average about 95% correct eligibility for people, which is quite an accomplishment. Kudos to Southwestern. That worked for us. But you know, there's challenges coming in, and I know there's another question about that. But you know, really do appreciate the work that Southwestern does. We are able to get people to apply. We have not had a wait list. We had a wait list for 2 months last summer, I think. It's probably the only wait list, and that went away. Some of that because of Halloween, but so we've not really had a wait list for people who need childcare since 2019, I believe, which is quite remarkable in a lot of ways because so many counties have wait lists. People wait ever to get childcare vouchers, and we've been able to serve anyone who really needs childcare.
Well, I think we have a lot to celebrate from that, and I love starting off on a positive note because then you have to get it down. So, I guess in terms of just getting into the nitty-gritty, because it doesn't have to be a negative conversation. Like we can have an important conversation about where we can improve, and that's really what we're here to do. So I don't view it as a down slope here, but Samantha, you raised something interesting, and just so y'all know, I'm going to popcorn these questions a little bit. I'll stop calling on you, so when you have something you want to volunteer, please feel free to speak up. If it's not applicable, feel free to ignore the question, just let it go me. So Amber said something really interesting about viewing childcare as infrastructure, right? We're having this greater conversation about what the role of childcare is and how important, how increasingly important it is to different parts of our community. What do you want us to know about that term or that phrase or that line of thinking between viewing it as infrastructure or talking about workforce? Like, what should we know or be thinking about in this space? Because we're focused or have been focused on local programs very specifically, but at a policy level, at a greater level from each of your lenses, what do you want us to know or what should we be thinking about when we hear those words, infrastructure or workforce, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's really a signal that what we're all talking about here is not a social issue that uniquely affects it's a systemic resource that upon which a healthy economy is built. If people can't raise families in a place, they can't live and work in a place. And that's a fact. And the more we write that understanding into the way that we make decisions, the way that we spend resources, I think the more likely that we are to see improved labor force participation. And not to get too kind of in economic development weeds here, but we are in a situation right now where obviously this community has unfortunately suffered some population loss since the disaster. There are some industries that continue to grow and that have real needs and voracious appetites for talent, and they're not going to be able to necessarily get those appetites for talent satisfied if we can't ensure that enough people can live, work, and raise families here. So that's kind of a direct relationship. And then other industries are seeing a little bit of labor market softening, which means that those industries maybe are not as voraciously in need of talent, but they are really in need of productivity. They're in need of making sure that their workers can show up every day consistently, continue to accept more responsibility, accept promotions, produce the way that those employers need them to produce so that they can meet their goals and continue to feel confident creating great paying jobs and delivering great benefits. And childcare challenges, some of us know this very personally, cause enormous disruptions sometimes to folks' ability to consistently participate at work and show up at work regularly. And if you don't have a plan B or a plan C behind you, if you don't have immediate family support, like a lot of residents unfortunately don't, then that can very quickly cascade into having to call in and say, listen, I can't be there today. And if that happens too frequently, that can undermine the worker's confidence in accepting a promotion. It can undermine the employer's confidence in keeping that person on. We don't want to see that. We want to make sure that there is enough ability for everyone who is ready to take on an opportunity within an employer and the community to be able to do that with confidence and to be able to do that consistently. And childcare is one of those things that includes that kind of participation.
And I'll extend, I'm just gonna extend that to talk about the infrastructure of the child, right? And building up the child. I know one of your questions is about childcare versus early learning, early childhood education. They are one and the same in a high quality program, right? Because any program that we are licensing in North Carolina, we are expecting there to be early childhood education happening in that program and not just sustaining that child's safety. Those are two different things. And the reality is when you're looking at a college program, the program you're taking is an early childhood education program, right? You're not going to get your bachelor's degree in childcare. So I think as a society, and we're way from doing this, but we've come so far to eliminate daycare from our vocabulary and to elevate it to childcare. And the next thing we need to do to professionalize the profession and give it its respect is to start calling it early childhood education, because that's exactly what it is. But the infrastructure of that child is also overworked, because we know that brain development is happening at a rapid pace before the age of 5. And so there's this moment of opportunity in which we really have to intervene. I was having a conversation with Rachel right before we got started, because I have a background in special education. So kind of like, how did I get here, right? It's kind of all the same. Early intervention is early intervention. And the earlier you intervene, the smaller the gap is, or you intervene before the gap is created. So we're not talking about third grade reading scores, because we got that kid early on, early enough to prevent it. So when we give them a strong foundation, it's kind of like we're architects, right? If we're building a condo, but that foundation is rocky, the building can go so high before it crashes. We have to make sure that the foundation is solid. And so they're ready for kindergarten. They're ready for third grade, middle school, high school. We're not talking about how do you sit in the classroom and listen, because we've worked on those behaviors. We've worked on social emotional work. We've worked on how do you maintain yourself. And you can't do that if you just skip over that and go straight to kindergarten. So we have to value it the same way we value public school education. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Sorry.
I want to share some statistics around the economic impacts on that infrastructure, but the first thing I've got to say as a final input on that, we know that when children have access to high quality early learning programs, not only do we see all of those better literacy rates and everything else that comes before, we know that they earn more as adults. I mean, when we study them at age 25 and age 30, they have higher incomes because they had those early learning opportunities. So that was beautiful. We did a study last year in partnership with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and it's called the Untapped Potential Report. I encourage you all to take a chance to look it up if you have an opportunity. But what we found in that study was that of individuals who had workplace disruptions and left the workforce over the last prior few years, 35% was because of a lack of access to childcare. We know that there are 100,000 fewer parents in North Carolina alone since before the pandemic. That has not fully recovered. And what we found in that report is that if North Carolina were to fix the childcare system and ensure that every family, regardless of their income level, regardless of where they live, had adequate access to high quality, affordable early learning programs, that we would see a $5.65 billion return on investment in North Carolina. Over $4 billion of that is direct economic impact. And then there's also I'm not going to remember it exactly right. It's 1.3 something billion dollars in tax returns, which is quite frankly more than enough to cover what we would need to fix the childcare system entirely. So we're looking at a tremendous economic return. We also did a report with with the North Carolina Department of Commerce that found about a $7.5 billion GDP increase if we were to address those same issues and allow folks to go back to work. And that other point, it's not just about that economic income that the state would receive. It's about the fact that those children don't just need those early learning programs, they need families that are able to provide for them so that they don't have the stress of not having enough food to eat and not having the other necessities that they can't have if their parents are able to.
Amy, I'm gonna throw you a little bit of a curveball, same question, but I feel something's naturally being pulled in from question 7, so I'll give you a second to look at that one if you want. Of just striking this balance between childcare and early learning, as Candace was alluding to. How do you balance these numbers that we're hearing? Because it's all favoring the idea that this is something we need to prioritize both at an economic and a social level. What does that balance look like for communities, and how do we do that better? What does that mean to you? No pressure.
Yeah,
Tell us.
yes, right. It's a tall order. Well, I wholeheartedly agree that early care and education, right, and high quality early care and education is something that is absolutely essential, and that we should not look at it as, oh, well, here, we've got child care that's only thing it's doing is allowing there to be a safe space for kids to be while their families work. Okay. You heard a lot of statistics, you heard about the long-term investment. And I think, the bottom line is childcare is expensive to operate, and it's expensive for families to pay for it. So what we really need is the right complement of childcare, high quality childcare that is subsidized, and for those folks who can pay private pay, and to really take advantage of whatever and grow funding so that free funding allows the community to offer the right balance of that kind of program. I feel like in some ways my colleagues have addressed that question already. I think we have definitely seen that when families are not able to enter the workforce, or they have been in situations of great stress, that absolutely translates to the child, right? And what kids are experiencing. So being able to support those families, have the educational outcomes that benefit kids, families, schools, community in the long term are essential. Anyway, I think we need to look at high quality early care and education. That's the term, and that we should see it as part of the education continuum and not really so much of a business as it is a service and really part of our infrastructure. So that was kind of,
Best kind of answer. Greg, what do you want to add on?
I mean, I think things have been said. I'll just take a moment. All that is, I would repeat back all that, but I'll just say that I think just the kind of historical context, like the language we use for childcare and how we try to advocate for it as the public good, as the infrastructure, as the education, all those things that it is also just kind of important to remember as we think about what the next kind of turn of the wheel for advocates are. And so just as a quick example, when I first started working on childcare policy in 1995, right around the time that it changed in this country, welfare as we know it, moving from AFDC, TANF, those acronyms. But my mentor at the time had just gone to a childcare conference where they had some of the first brain science, MRI stuff around the impact of what's happening in a child's brain, how its first years are in terms of learning and development. And I remember us in that office being like, well, this is it. We're going to win the argument on childcare, and we're going to make it rain for public investment. For childcare, like this done, like case closed. That was 1995. And so I just think it's important to remember that there's a lot of terms that have been kind of in the lexicon of advocates. I think that infrastructure is a really solid kind of framework right now that I think sticks and really helps make the case. It is also still early learning, also childcare for some in terms of what the name is. But I think that underscore that everything that's been said is so true. And part of what we are working with is like the environment, the political environment of how do you win the kind of investment that infrastructure and education deserve and need so that families have what they need and children have what they need. And that's I think where we're at, and Buncombe County to be applauded for the investment you'll make and recognizing that as Amy said, this is not something you do on the cheap. So it's going to take all levels of public investment as well as public-private partnership to really get this to scale.
Philip, I know we left you with nothing but experts to come behind or after at this point, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in if you wanted to, or I can.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I would agree with everything that's been said. I think you can have both. But I think you can have childcare and early learning and all be combined in one. As Greg mentioned, you got to fix the system first to make that happen. We probably come at it more from a workforce side, at least, because we administer public assistance programs, and there's work requirements required in a lot of those programs, and get to have more and more work requirements, and more people in order to receive benefits have to either be working or doing something. So they need childcare. We should be able to provide that to them. In all good conscience, I can't say someone you need to go out and do 100 hours a month if you're going to lose all your benefits and just say, good luck. So we come at it from the workforce side of a lot. But I think you can have both, but you got to fix the system as it exists now.
I hear that. I think both make sense. And I hear money is a big common theme amongst all of you so far, so I'm eager to dive into that. But in our conversations with our partners at every level, one of the words that I hear coming up more and more in different forms, including providers, Commissioner Whiteside gets, I think every commissioner receives it, is this stuff around behavioral health. And all of you are already nodding, so I have no doubt we're going to have a good conversation on this. What do you want us to know that we might not be thinking about, right? As we're doing our site visits, as we're hearing from people more directly, and we're seeing how we improve, invest in high quality, those words seem intrinsically linked with behavioral health in some way. How do we frame this for us as policymakers in this space? And I'll let y'all jump in whatever you like here.
If I had a magic wand and I could just put knowledge in everyone's head, I think my desire would be for everyone to have an understanding of what social emotional learning is. It's not a bad word, And it really is just making sure that children understand their emotions and can manage themselves. And I don't mean just children, because adults also need social emotional learning. Because of dysregulation. That's what we see when you're watching the news and you're seeing like road rage and people are shooting at cars on 40. They are dysregulated. They have not learned how to regulate their emotions. They're not explaining their feelings. So what we need to teach our little ones is how to manage those feelings. It's okay to have them, but what is an appropriate way to show them? What can I give you as an accommodation to say when you're feeling like this and you can't verbalize it because you're in the moment? Here's a sign. Here's what I want you to do when you feel like that. You don't have to tell me anything. This corner is for you, or this pillow is for you, or turn this part this way. We have to give them the tools because they're children and they don't know how to regulate those big feelings that they have to take over their bodies, right? And so if we can do that at an earlier stage, we can prevent some of the behaviors that we're seeing in elementary school, middle school, and high school that prevent them from being allowed to be in the classroom. Because they'll call the former me special ed candidates and say, hey, this kid's got to go. She shouldn't be in this classroom, or he shouldn't be in this classroom. They need to be in the classroom down the hall. When in reality, we haven't taken the time to teach that child how to do it.
I think I'd like to add to that is how important it is for us to make, how important it is for us to make sure that childcare teachers are given the tools that they need. Because, and there's a University of Nebraska study that showed that the number one predictive factor, or the only predictive factor in how, in the difference in how well a child was able to learn social emotional skills and self-regulation in a preschool classroom was how the mental health of their childcare teacher. So if you think about, I mean, it's so basic, right? If you think about it at home, if you are, if you're stressed, if you're anxious, you're not as good of a parent that day. Well, imagine, for that childcare teacher in that classroom, if they are dealing with stress and they don't know how to handle the emotional health that they're experiencing, they're not able to provide that child with what they need to learn that self-regulation. And I think there's so many things that we can do to really help that workforce, help our childcare providers be able to have the best mental health that they can at that stage in their life. And a lot of that comes down to things we might talk about in another space around if you're making $14 an hour, that's a stressful life most of the time. If you don't have access to adequate healthcare services, or adequate food. I mean, we know that so many of our childcare providers are on the same food assistance programs that Philip was referencing before, and so making sure that we are giving our childcare providers the tools and supports that they need so that they can show up in the classroom the way that the kids need them to show up.
43% of our teachers are on federal, some type of public assistance. 43.
So if any of you, and it's not to put any of you on the spot, but just can you give us a general sense, and this might be a little bit of a great question, because in a regional sense, we hear this and that moves all of our hearts, right? We're sitting here thinking like, what do these wonderful human beings who are doing this work, certainly not for the pay, need to stay in the game? We hear behavioral health, we hear more money, we hear more training, education. Is anyone doing this right? Is there anyone that you start drawing from to figure out what areas we should be improving at a very direct short-term and long-term, right? Because I want to see immediate impact, but also bigger impact.
Sure, I don't know that, yeah. I will say that you named the things that we know we need. It is wages, it is being able to have not just compensation for the teachers, but pathway for like systemic stability for the programs and the operators as well. It's both of those things. It's also the mental health component for both teachers and for the children. I would say that one example that comes to mind in our region is what has been done up in Watauga County with their Chamber of Commerce. Their Chamber of Commerce Foundation, just put in funds last October after a lien to cover tuition expenses after the storm impact and there was so much uncertainty. And then this October, they've come back again and kind of made October their child care focus month. They've they decided to pilot for a month a program that we were advocating for at the state level because they have childcare as a benefit for childcare teachers, so childcare teachers with young children, and helping cover that expense. And so for October in Tioga County, they've been able to cover the childcare expenses of teachers. And I think, those ideas about what is it right now, the system is so fragile, and what are the things that can really center in on not losing any more of the workforce, not losing any more programs. We've learned just this month in October across our region that 5 childcare programs are given notice that they're closing or have closed. And so, our thing is, not one more program, not one more teacher, and it is a combination of mental health, behavioral health, wages, systemic investments. So that's one example, but those are definitely sure there's examples too.
Only thing I'll add to what Greg said is we know that when teachers have access to wages, which is basically helping increase their take-home pay, that they have a 13% turnover rate, and that's half of what the or I think less than half of what the state average is for turnover. So we know that salary does matter quite a bit.
Can you tell everybody more about what the wages program is?
Yeah, sure. So the wages program provides salary supplements to early educators based on where they are kind of on an educational scale, and the years of experience in their education. And it is a program that we are grateful to the Division of Child Development and Early Education, who provides the funding for the administration of it. And Smart Start local partnerships provide the funding for the actual salary supplements. So supplements are given twice a year, and local partnerships determine what's the cap that you want. So what's the amount to which teachers can make in order to be eligible, and above them, we have then at the top of that cap, which I'm happy to say is critical in terms of more teachers being eligible. So yeah, it has been shown to be a great example of a program that impacts retention. And, the ripple effect of turnover on kids, on teachers, on families and employers is huge. So yeah, wages and promoting statewide wages. Right, you're probably going to get to this at some point as something to look at the policy and advocating for that kind of program. We know supplements make a difference. We know that from funding that you all have helped provide the partnership in order to be able to directly support teachers in NC pre-K program.
I appreciate that perspective. Philip, you're itching to jump in and say something there.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think it's kind of a capacity issue in a lot of different ways for us. And you're right, Amy. The wages program, I mean, we don't hold childcare teachers up to a standard that they need to be held to. People making $13, $14 an hour. We run an employment program through AV Tech. I would have a hard time referring someone into that program at $13, $14 an hour when they can go to Chick-fil-A and make $19 an hour.
Don't say that too loud.
So the level of, but for us, we returned $1.7 million last year of funding that we had for childcare that we couldn't spend. The year before, we returned 1.6 million of our funding allocation. We didn't spend. If you look at the state, it was $56 million was unspent last year.
In the wage account? And you said unspent under what area?
Across the state with all the subsidized childcare dollars.
Yeah.
56 million, last year 79 million. So there's obviously money there that can be used to help this system in a lot of different ways. You know, where we lost capacity over the years, and I understand it from the DCDE standpoint, but family childcare homes that basically are non-existent because those used to be a great resource for people to use. And as the certification requirements got stronger and stronger, and they're basically under the same umbrella as the childcare facility anymore, those folks said, the heck with this. I'm not going to do this anymore. So you lost a lot of capacity there. That's a quick win if we could bump up somehow, some way, those family child care homes, because they would help ease the system. My name's on the county website for child care assistance, so I get telephone calls all the time. And the first thing I always tell people is, I can give you a voucher all day long. The hardest part, do you have a slot? That's the first thing I always ask. Do you have a slot? And if they don't, the voucher's not going to do anything. So we really struggle with spending the money that we're allocated, which is a shame in a lot of ways.
Quick follow-up question. I know in the housing space, for a while, there were community members working on trying to solve the issue of housing vouchers that were issued and then unspent because they didn't find a unit. Is that the case with childcare where we have issued?
It's the exact same.
And if it's approved and never utilized because they don't get it?
It's the exact same. I mean, what happens is if they get a voucher and they don't have a slot within a certain amount of time.
So one of the reasons we don't have enough slots is because the amount that the voucher is for doesn't cover the cost of care to provide that child care. So for a child care center to open a new slot with the amount of money that they're able to receive from the voucher, they can't actually afford to pay for what it would take to give that child care. They're losing money on those subsidy slots as opposed to it helping prop up their business to be able to take more private paying parents. So right now the state is currently operating with the 2021 market rates for childcare costs. I think I don't have to tell you all about inflation. There's a thing that happened. Also, the market rates as they were artificially low anyway, because they were covering what, it looked like the market rate was, but that was too low to actually have a provider be able to pay decent wages to be able to provide all of the things that they needed to provide. We have not been able to get state investment to increase to the 2023 market rates. We also know that we need to do a lot in terms of what those rates look like to make sure that they're actually covering the cost of care. And so some of the things that we've advocated for have been around increasing those market rates and also setting in place a subsidy floor to ensure that we don't have counties, again, just getting those artificially low market rates. But for us to have childcare centers open up slots, we have to provide vouchers that are going to cover that cost.
And just to acknowledge what Philip just stated about the money that was reverted. In the previous years, we're coming off of ARPA funding, so we had a ton of federal money. So now that we're getting back into what state money and state dollars are, we have wait lists across the state, like more than 74 counties have wait lists. That we have almost 18,000 kids across the state on wait list that are waiting for someone in your department to come and say, hey, I have a slot, come on down. And so that is where we are today versus when we had support from those COVID relief dollars. And I will say that it is all a big circle, right? Because at one point we're talking about teachers. And yes, you're right that they can go to Chick-fil-A or Walmart or anywhere, all of it for $23 and you don't even have to bag groceries. But not only do you get that pay bump, you're also getting paid time off and you get sick leave and you get medical health care. And you get dental health care, and you have an option for retirement, and all of these things that our businesses can't compete. So I can't open another classroom because I can't find any teachers to work it, so I can't take any more kids, which means I can't accept any more slots at less than 50% of my tuition.
Well, I think you're drilling down on something that's been really of interest in sport, so I'm gonna ask kind of a two-parter. Erica, just for context, how much was the voucher cover? We're talking about these theoretical vouchers that don't fully cover the cost. What does that look like numbers-wise, so we can wrap our minds around that?
There are over 3,000 market rates because it's based on the county that you live in and the age of the child and other factors that Candace would need to tell you because I don't know them all because there are over 3,000 rates.
It's less than half of that.
And we have, I mean, Jeff, Greg, do you, I don't know what you want to say.
Buncombe County is artificially low in our rate.
I would probably, my guess is probably about 70% of the cost of that. You know, the whole market rate with Greg and I and Amy have had this conversation for years and years. You know, that trying to figure out how to get to the market rate is, you almost have to be Albert Einstein. Because it is so complicated. You'd be better off just throwing that whole system out and starting over and doing the right thing to start with. It is unbelievable how counties how the rates, some counties are so much higher than others. And you can never really understand.
Which is what we're advocating for, but
Yeah.
So for context on this one, because I don't know how many people are watching online, I'm going to be completely clear of who's setting this. Who is setting these rates that you're describing?
the providers, actually.
What's that?
The providers. So we do a survey every year and we ask providers, how much would it take for you to, how much are your services, what is your market rate? How much does it cost? What is your tuition? And the General Assembly typically sets the reimbursement rates at the 75th percentile of that number. That is the average for the county by grade, by age, by type. Is it a home? Is it a center? Is it rural? Is it suburban? There are a lot of different methodologies that kind of go into that. One is it assumes that care is significantly cheaper in a rural area than in urban, right? Even though inflation, as Erica just stated, is real. The cost of milk and gas and bread has gone up no matter what county you live in. So that is something that we, as we're talking to the General Assembly and educating and lobbying for an alternative market rate, those are one of the things that kind of goes out with that is we need to update the system. We need to come down from 3,000 different rates to just 21. We have a proposal. There's a plan that automatically adjusts for inflation every year. But it will take investment to kind of get the ball rolling initially, which is why we're starting off with, let's just get from the 2021 rates, which is what people are being paid at now, to at least the 2023 rates. And then hopefully establishing the floor so that there isn't this big gap just because you're like on this side of the county line versus this.
We have $56 million earmarked for subsidies, which could make that investment. Why aren't we doing that? I mean, it's right there in the same silo, same bucket. It makes no sense. Absolutely none. And the fact that we can't seem to talk to our legislators with the $7.5 billion impact, what language do we need to speak so that they understand this?
They need to hear from you.
They do.
They hear from us.
Oh, they do. Trust me. But we're not speaking, there's something, I mean, it's like, we need to just put all the kids, when parents can't get childcare, just take them over to the legislature and let them run the halls, you know, and see what it's like.
I would find that very interesting. We can do that. Let me ask you, because I am curious about that, and I'm going to try to put it in a way that won't give me a slap on the wrist from Raleigh. We know the policy issues, your policy advocacy issues that you're focused on right now, and we're hearing a lot of that rise to the top. If you could, without getting yourself in political trouble, share with us at a state level and a local level, just one sentence each on what you think we should be saying. What is the line? If we have one person who's willing to listen to us and you want to ask for a specific change in the space to make the highest and best use of the dollars that exist. We hear there's over 56 million, maybe more than that in different spaces. What is the line of single best impact? If you could wave your magic wand to use your expression, what would you tell us to ask for?
Can I give two answers? Is that, am I breaking the
Let's do it.
rules?
So you give
Break the
mine
rules.
too.
The first thing I would say is right now, this year, I would ask the state to fund a subsidy floor. Or at minimum to fund a subsidy floor for infants and toddlers where the cost is the highest, because that's gonna be the fastest way that we can get money into the communities that need it to be able to help better Band-Aid, for lack of a better word, the situation that we're in. We can help more families if we put in place a subsidy floor or at least a partial subsidy floor. In the long run, we have to adequately invest in what the actual cost of care is for childcare centers to be able to provide adequate, high quality early learning programs, because that's the way that we're gonna give our kids what they need in the long term. And that's the way that we're gonna make sure we have an economy that's thriving so that families can support those children at the same time.
And that reduces the amount of, lost revenue that providers take on by accepting children that have subsidy vouchers, which impacts their ability to pay.
I think exactly what they said. It seems like a golden opportunity, especially now that we are in this unfortunate climate, and Candace can say more about this, where we are seeing an increase in licensed childcare providers closing, people who are providing care through the licensed family childcare home getting close to the age of retirement and saying, I just can't struggle with this anymore, it's time for me to bow out. You're losing a lot of that capacity that was being supported a little bit with those really important COVID era grants from stabilization that went away at the end of March. And we were really hopeful that we would see some systemic investment in childcare access in an industry in the legislature, but there's no budget. Something I want to emphasize is that there are dollars to support better childcare subsidy reimbursement rates in both chambers' budget drafts, but we just don't have that budget done. And I also don't want to let this go without acknowledging, we realize this isn't the only issue that is hurting right now as a result of that inaction. There are lots of other really pressing matters going on. I realize that. I would just say continue to encourage investment in the whole industry, and that's a really smart way of doing it that would help a lot of these childcare businesses, because that's what they are, by the way, retain some of their revenue. These places operate on incredibly tight margins, and making sure that there's a little bit more capital there for them to spend, like Candace said, to employ people, to pay them better, to give them access to non-salary benefits, to hold on to the most experienced and most passionate and purpose-driven teachers in early care and education, so that children can hang on to their same educators year over year and not suffer teacher turnover, because kids suffer from that too, so parents, and make sure that this industry is stabilized and something that's dependable and resilient and healthy for people working in it, learning from it, depending on it, as workers. That's all really important. And I would also say that when you're in those conversations with decision makers, to have the ability to take an employer with you. Have them understand these are places that are trying to fill available roles that are sitting vacant. These are other places that are seeing challenges in their productivity, and they have a really good suspicion as to why that is. If there's inadequate access to childcare in their community, and having more of it can improve the outcomes that they're trying to achieve as an employer, let people who sign other folks' checks say that for you, because that goes a long way in the minds of decision makers.
Amy Greg Phillip? I've got more questions like that too. I just want to give you a chance to go in and like.
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, you gotta make it to where you're not asking people to get rich to run a childcare facility, but you've got to be able to pay it at least to where you can break even. If somebody asked me about opening a childcare facility, I would say you got a hole in your head. I mean, really, because you know that is as was stated, one or two kids that you don't have enrolled in your facility will make or break you as far as whether or not you're making money or losing.
That was great. Thank you.
I think there are a couple of things that we should really be focusing on. And there's been a proposal about providing childcare support for childcare teachers. And I think really understanding that, when you look at the cycle of why we don't have enough slots, and as a result are reverting funds for subsidy when there's such a desperate need, is because we don't have the teachers. Why don't we have the teachers? The compensation is really low. It's extremely stressful. And then when we don't have those teachers, we don't have the slots. And we also have kids that are not getting the quality of early care and education because of the low pay of teachers and who's coming into the workforce. So you've got all that going on. And to look at how many childcare teachers or how many folks could be childcare teachers if they had childcare for their own kids is something that we should really be focusing on. So, and Greg, we might have more detail on this in terms of, proposed policy around that. But that's something that would make a huge difference. And it's something that we could also look at locally.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, and it will be more than one sentence, but the, North Carolina, we had a chance this last January to work with a lot of state, local, regional organizations, NC Child, North Carolina Partnership for Children, to really talk about what is the ask of the state legislature, knowing that the compensation grants are ending at the end of March, and also hearing very loud and clear that there was not an appetite to continue that model. I think that probably we all would have championed continuing that model as go into overtime on that one, but we knew that was not an option. And so that floor request using state dollars to create a subsidy rate floor was seen as the number one plane to land first. And then the other two that came up were about workforce. And so that was the wages program and the childcare for childcare workers. Due to some early signaling by some legislators meetings, we kind of deferred the wages request. But I really think that those were the first three planes that need to land at the state level. So I'd say that those requests would still stand by them. I think that the odds that the budget is going to be passed this year seem to be going forward from the information we're hearing, but they'll be back in the short session. I think it's the floor, and then it's some workforce supports, job for teachers, expansion of wages. We'd like to see all three of those points at the moment.
I'd like to jump in briefly. I know we've heard and seen this term of the local child care floor. Can anyone provide some more practical information about how that would impact Cook County specifically? What our rates are now, if we're near the floor, would this be likely to impact us?
Yes.
Greg's got the spreadsheet right here.
Talked like 30 to an hour long presentations just on the market rates and just all this. I'll say that Western North Carolina counties in general lag pretty far behind sort of disparity of rates that are paid in other areas. We kind of have Watauga, which we count in our Western North Carolina region, look at our highest quality toddler rates are really down at the bottom, starting at $800 something, 22 for a reimbursement, whereas other counties like Mecklenburg are being paid $14.73. Right, so there's a gap. And so when we talk about a child care subsidy rate, reimbursement rate, we're talking about no county paid below a certain. And while there's a lot of deliberation on what the budget allocation would be, how much money would be, and where that would allow DCDE to potentially set a minimum rate, the idea is that the minimum rate would really lift. There's just so many counties that are still for the highest quality in toddler slot, which is really kind of the most expensive slots you could try to purchase or pay for. And so many counties are just restarting, still billing $1,000 in this recent market rate numbers. Even moving to that doesn't bring even all the counties up above 1,000. So Buncombe County, depending on what age, what star level, again, there's way too many. But the models that we're looking at in terms of where we're hoping a floor would be set, greatly benefit Buncombe County.
We're probably below the
It would bring up Buncombe in significant ways. I think we see a difference in this county for sure.
But that just kind of goes to show you where the disparity exists in those market rates, because I'll tell you, I live in Watauga County. And it actually is probably more expensive to live there than it is in Mecklenburg County. Housing is more expensive in that county than it is.
Yeah, and Buncombe currently is just over 1,000 for 5-star infant childhood care, but the floor rates that we're looking at again. So.
Well, that goes back to when legislators and staff were here in what, 96 or 97, and we're sitting in that room.
Yeah.
And we're talking about subsidy rates, and they said, well, yours is lower because it's cheaper to live in Buncombe. And I think my hair caught on fire. I remember.
How did it snow? Yeah.
I mean, that was such, and at that moment in time, we were the most expensive county to live in the state. And our own people, I say our own, not our legislators per se, but our people had no clue.
Erica, you wanna jump in there?
The one thing I want to add into Samantha made reference to the Senate and House proposals, both including budget proposals, including funds for increases in childcare funding. The funding amount that the two chambers agreed upon but have not passed a budget for is enough funding that if they were to move forward with it the right way, we could get a subsidy floor in place for the infant toddler population and 2023 market rates for 3 to 5 year olds. So we just need to pass that. Now that is, I want to be very, very clear, that is a far cry from what we need in the long term. But we have, I mean, we just need them to do that. So.
Heard. I'm gonna do 2 lightning round questions because then I have one thing that I legally cannot avoid doing. I think we have our attorney in the room, so I would hate to upset her if I was breaking the law. Have you seen any examples of cross-sector collaboration, private partnerships, specifically thinking that we need to be aware of and should be paying attention to how we can move towards the goals that I hear y'all largely all agree on? We have an idea of where we want to land. What does that look like? Who should we be looking at? What's the quick jump in resource? I've heard Watauga has some interesting things happening we need to be eyeing in on. Anyone else?
My favorite example of EVs, not to play favorites, but I love it. I won't talk about that one. I'll let her do that. I get to observe these types of things frequently, and it's something that, and I'm lucky for that, by the way, because like I said, it's a really challenging problem, and being able to have a ringside seat to some of the innovation and productivity that people are exhibiting, taking bites out of this where they can, how they can, is really helpful just with my sales. And I recommend it highly. But there are a lot of really promising things that are happening through public-private collaboration, and sometimes they're just purely employer-led too, which is great. I'll give you one example. There is an employer, a really large one in logistics called UPS. They decided in 2021 to figure out exactly what the needs of their workers were in their highest turnover population at just one of their sites in Northern California. They did some surveying. I can send it to you all because this is written up in a really popular report published in early 2024. And learned that the highest turnover workers, who were hourly folks on their packaging lines, mostly leveraged a form of care called family friend and neighbor care, not necessarily licensed. Statistically speaking, it's usually a grandparent. And that was something that worked for these folks. Most of them were second shift or later, so it fit their needs in terms of schedule. It was financially worthwhile. It was socially and culturally preferential sometimes for a lot of reasons. But the problem is that when you use that form of care and that care provider has to go to a doctor's appointment or they get sick with the flu, then you're in that situation where you need to plan your plan really quickly. And if you don't have it, it'll cascade and affect your work performance and your attendance. So rather than assuming, which a lot of employers do, they don't necessarily have the information or the knowledge that they need to choose a good benefit that will work for them and their workforce and their budget, that they would build an on-site childcare center, which is something that I think probably the most conventional picture that we all have in our minds of employers getting involved with childcare. They did this survey and they said, what if we just created a backup benefit that's only there for people whenever they need it because they already have a care arrangement that they're having. They were able to do this at a relatively low cost. It's not something like asking an employer to set aside $2 or $3 million, find an architect, find an engineer, and figure out how to become a provider of early care and education when that's not at all in their wheelhouse or what they do. They got to kind of stick to what they were doing. They found a tutor or a provider of care who was able to find credentialed and experienced childcare providers only as needed, and they were able to do it on site in one single updated room, admitting up to 5 children per day at maximum for this emergency benefit. And they saw enormous improvements in productivity in terms of reduced turnover, which is extremely expensive for employers in every sector. And it's something that we really encourage employers in a lot of industries to look into doing. And where this gets into public-private is, I was talking with the vendor that helped enable this pilot at UPS in California whenever they stepped into this role, and they weren't very confident that they would be able to try it in North Carolina because they were concerned that it wasn't congruent with licensing and regulatory policy. But Candace leads a really amazing team at PCDE, and their licensing and regulatory division got on the phone with me, and also this third-party vendor, and kind of like went line by line down a series of hypotheticals to figure out, is this the type of care we could deliver in North Carolina if we wanted to? And the answer was yes. So we got that in writing. It's perfectly allowable. The difference maker is helping, first of all, connect those dots, making sure that if there are licensing and regulatory questions that we ask them and that we get those answers. And that, of course, we make sure that employers understand that they have many, many different options to choose from. That's what I'm here to do, by the way. If any of you ever hear from employers in your networks who need a little bit more information, or if they have a creative idea around this, but they're really not sure where to start, that's what my role does. It's what it's here to support, and I really encourage this steps.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to ask y'all just to, I know there's a myriad of topics we could go into. If we could keep you all for another hour and please suspend county commission, I would do that. I can't. So can you take us out with just 30 seconds of anything that you haven't brought up or hasn't come up organically that you want us to know as a quick takeaway before we wrap up, and I have to invoke the public comment part.
I think we've covered a lot of it. I would just say thank you, like gratitude that this is even a conversation in space, that you're putting your minds together to say, how is this a problem that we can fix, and not necessarily waiting for the state to fix it. Maybe you're going to develop a model that the state can say, hey, look at this county, they're doing some great things. How do we scale this to?
Give us at least a week.
I'll mention North Carolina. So there's a nationwide study that the Amy Casey Foundation does each year, and it looks at childhood outcomes across 35 different indicators. NC Child as a data center, you can look county by county and actually see where Buncombe County is on each of those indicators. But North Carolina across the country ranks 34th in childhood outcomes. And so many of those, including access to affordable housing, including whether a child lives in a low-income home, has adequate food security, all of those, not to mention, of course, your third grade literacy, math proficiency in the 8th grade. All of those scores go back to whether a child and a family has access to high-quality early learning programs. We rank 34th, and I think we rank, first in so many things. I think there's certainly a lot of work that we can do in this space that can help us do better across the state for our kids.
I'll just say thank you for having this time to talk. I'm happy to talk anytime for any length again. And I just want to bring up too that what Philip was mentioning, and it's mentioned before too, I think there's a lot of opportunity in North Carolina around reinvigorating the Plaza Family Church childcare home space. There's some efforts underway through the Vision and other pilots that are really trying to look at that. And then also that, again, it's infrastructure, it's a public investment, working together to figure out, how we amend those public investments to go into some programs that could work, could be expanded, could be even better with this chronically like childcare subsidies. So thank you for the time and attention.
Thank you for your time. Yeah, I would just say, and probably this opposed for Candace around other waivers or flexibilities that counties can really kind of look at to say from a state standpoint, like childcare, family childcare home or something. Are there things that we could do as a local county to make things better and to improve our capacity or move forward? A lot of things. And I guess the other thing I would say is, I read an article 2 or 3 weeks ago about New Mexico, how they're now offering universal child care for everybody in the state, regardless of income. I wonder, when I read it, I said, New Mexico. I wouldn't think of them as a very profitable state in a lot of different ways, but if they can do it, how? Basically, we can learn.
Well, I feel like we're going to be calling on you again, so I'm happy to give you the last word if you wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, so many things here. Well, I think we heard loud and clear 3 top things around policy potential to make a difference. The subsidy floor, creating a statewide wages program so that we're not just relying upon local partnerships to give the funding for supplements, but that there is state funding to increase access to wages, and then childcare support for childcare teachers. So huge chunk of that is focused on compensation, right? And again, we're not going to improve the workforce if teachers aren't adequately compensated, and we're not going to improve quality of care until teachers are adequately compensated. So I think a real focus on wages and training and retention, things that we should really be focused on. And I do want to add one other, and Philip I know that Philip knows way more about this than I do, but the flexibility for local communities to kind of customize how subsidy funds are used is a real opportunity so that funds don't have to be reverted. So just, an example of that is paying enhanced rates for infant and toddler slots.
For me, it would be about, I used the 1.6 million that I reverted to do things like that. That would be local flexibility. You get a lot of bang out of your butt.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us today. I've learned a lot from this, and I'm sure the committee is grateful for your time. So thank you for being here, and give them a round of applause. We will make sure all of your contact information is listed in a nice public place so we can follow all of our questions. But truly, thank you for making the time for us. To kind of share, and spoiler alert, we are going to be having an extra meeting on November 18th to assure that we actually take all the wisdom we got here and act on it while it's still fresh in mind. I know that my brain works less well after Thanksgiving break, so we're going to do it beforehand. And really start the process of discussing targeted funding and a bigger conversation I'll save for another time. Since we do have one public comment, my friend Stephanie Jones is here. If you want to give us 3 minutes real quick, you don't have to use the full 3, but I did want to introduce you since you signed up.
Thank you, and this may be more as a question, so if there's a way I can get information. I am the child specialist for Hope Trinity. I cover 22 counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene. We have with VIA, but, via the program. I am wondering because before I was a child specialist, I was, a school specialist for Buncombe County Schools for 20 years. For this conversation, I've always said, start younger and you'll stop triaging at top. You'll start younger, pay them more the younger the kids are. Martin's heard me say this a million times. It's been my mantra. So I'm very happy to be here and hear this conversation, but specifically interested, Samantha and Candace maybe, and again, doesn't, you don't have to respond necessarily now, but I'm interested in the restructure of our communities and child care and early child care education development. Is there some sort of framework that happens in the eastern part of our state, way more than it's ever happened, of course, here in Western North Carolina? Is there some sort of framework that we can begin to look at to, accommodate our, not just Buncombe County, but all these counties that have been impacted? And again, you don't have to respond necessarily, but if that can be shared, but I'd like to know that.
Is your question specific to disaster recovery?
Yeah, just the recovery efforts and the rebuilding.
I'd actually be really curious I think a lot of us would like to know the answer to that, because it is an opportunity for us to kind of work this into a lot of lanes that early childhood isn't even the core focus of, but other money that's coming in for other purposes might be worked in. Would y'all be open to sharing our information, doing a Zoom call? And we can make it as public as people want, but I'd be curious if y'all have capacity for that.
I mean, I think we could, I will be 100% honest in saying that I believe that the impact of the disaster happening in the West has enlightened, I will say, the state to think about how we can prepare for disasters across the entire state and not just the coast. And so a lot of that will be kind of in the works of being built about how do we look at this holistically. But as we get more information, happy to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Candace's team has a lot of knowledge on this, and they operate a portal that is meant to help collect kind of like real-time data and feedback from impacted providers of childcare and early education that's taken in some really helpful information that's super instructive. A colleague of ours at Smart Start leads an ongoing task force related to disaster recovery around childcare and early education. Greg sits on that and those, as do several folks here actually, and those refer regularly and they would have some good insight to share. And then I think there's just like a lot to learn. Amy can speak to this too, from the providers that went through the process of working with environmental and public health through the division so that they could get clearance to operate whenever some of us were returning to the community, or for those who had been able to stay throughout, lights were slowly coming back on and the water was beginning to flow, but it wasn't clean. And that care needed to come back and needed to come back fast for a lot of different reasons. Those folks have a lot of real experience and lessons for a lot of us to learn from about what that process was like for them, and ways we can make sure that all of our policy and procedures are based in that.
I will say that because of one of the laws that just passed, we have a work group that is a collaboration between DBE and public health, which is what you talk about water, sanitation, building code, fire marshal, all of those entities. All of those entities create the rules for early ed, right? It's not just us. And so how do we all come to make sure that our laws and rules are not contradictory to each other? And how do we make sure that we can remove any obstacles that are in the way? And so because we are also still recovering from Helene, that kind of gives a natural segue into how do we do this also for when disasters are happening, so that we are proactive and we already know when this happens, you know, this is your point A, point B, point C, and here's where we go.
Wonderful. Well, I'm not opposed to y'all sticking around, but Alan and I have to go to a different portion of the meeting. So just to do our formal notice, special meeting will be held November 18th from 1 to 2:30 in this room, 310. Next regular meeting after that is going to be December 2nd. Come here caffeinated, a little less turkey in you, and 1 p.m. till 2:30, 310. Thank you all again for being here. We'll go ahead and adjourn. Have some objection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.